Okay friends, it's time to get started on replacing our power steering pump. The first step would be to go ahead and flush out your power steering system. This area right here is your power steering reservoir. This is where the fluid's going to be. You want to go ahead and read that cap, and it's going to tell you exactly what type of fluid to use. So make sure you use the manufacturer's specified fluid. For now, I'm just going to go ahead and take this cover off of here. And now we can continue on by raising the front of the vehicle so we can remove the passenger side front wheel. Okay friends, it's time to get started on our job. One of the first things we need to do is safely raise and support the front of the vehicle so the wheel's off the ground. After that, we're going to remove our center cover here and then all 5 of our lug nuts so we can remove the wheel. Now we're going to try to get this out of the way. Let's remove our 2 bolts. Now that we have that shield out of the way, we have a nice clear view of where our power steering pump is located. Now what we need to do is de-adjust this so we have plenty of slack from the belt so we can go ahead and take it right off of the pump. To do that, I'm going to come right here to this 12mm headed bolt and go ahead and loosen that right up. That's nice and loose. Now the next thing we want to do is get right up along the top of this pump. You're going to have to feel along with your fingers so you can find another 12mm headed bolt. It's kind of on like the rearward side top of this pump. I'm just going to go ahead and put my 12mm socket up on there. Now when I do this, I only want to go a little bit because as you can tell there isn't very much room for the socket and the ratchet, and I don't want to keep loosening this until it gets jammed. Okay. Now as you can tell, it just loosened up. I can move this a little bit. Just going to pivot this down, swing the belt right off of this. There we are. Now at this point, I'd just like to inspect the belt. This one, as you can tell, looks very good, but if you see a lot of cracking on it, you're going to want to replace it. To replace it, you'd also have to remove your serpentine belt. I'm not worried about that, so I'll set it aside so it gets no fluid on it as we remove the rest of the power steering pump. Now feeling up along the top where this pressure line comes in, I can see that there's a rubber boot. Let's go ahead and slide that up, and now we have a wire and an electrical connector. We're going to go ahead and squeeze on the tab for that electrical connector, and then we're going to try to slide it up and off of the power steering pump sensor here. Okay, squeezing the tab. Just going to pop that off, set it aside. Now at this point, we're going to start draining our power steering fluid. We're going to do that right in this area here. So we'll just go ahead and take this clamp, squeeze it, slide it up the hose here, remove the hose from the pump. There's going to be fluid that comes out, and it's going to want to try to get all down here. I just made something out of cardboard that's going to funnel it right down into my collection bucket and make a little less mess. Now sometimes you might have to use a pick to break this free. I just generally twist it. Here we go. Now let's let all that fluid drain out. Now I'm just going to use a 24mm wrench. I'm going to try to get right up onto this sensor here, and then we're going to break it free. So now we're just going to try to hold that bottom piece right there. I'm going to use my 24 socket with an extension, see if I can break this free. There we are. Now that we have it broken free, I'm just going to go ahead and fully remove this. There is going to be more fluid that comes out of this, so make sure you have your collection plate ready. Got our little gasket there. Remove your sensor. Now the next thing we're going to do is remove this 12mm headed nut right here. Once you have the nut off, we're going to continue on by removing this bracket. To do that, go ahead and fully remove this bolt. Pop that right out of there. Grab onto this bracket. You want to remember exactly the way that it went. Now we're going to continue on the back side of the engine. You're going to find 2 mounting bolts. There's one right here, and then there's one on the other side of that power steering pressure hose. Just going to leave that one in just a couple threads here, and then I'll fully remove the other one. Now let's just go ahead and swing that power steering pump out of the way, and you have clear view of one last 12mm headed bolt right there. Let's go ahead and remove it. All right, I've got that one nice and loose. At this point, you can just leave that right in there. Let's go ahead and fully remove that rear bolt. Let's go ahead and get this right out of here. And now we can start removing the bracket from the pump. Now at this point, we're gonna go ahead and take this over to the bench so we can continue on. What we wanna do next is start removing this pulley right here. There's gonna be a mounting nut for that, but when you try to turn it, it's gonna go ahead and spin this pulley. I'm just gonna take a nice screwdriver, come right through this hole and through this area here. Turn this counterclockwise until it locks it in, and then remove this 17mm headed nut. And now we have access to our mounting hardware for the bracket. To start removing these two bolts right here, you're gonna wanna make sure that you use a 14mm wrench on the back side. Go ahead and put that right on the nut that corresponds with the bolt. Loosen it up. There we are. Do the same to this one. If your bolt doesn't want to come out, that's very simple. You just come right over to this one, we'll remove this, and it'll make it so the bracket has plenty of space to let that out. Now let's go ahead and grab onto that pump. We're going to lift it straight up and out of the brackets. There it is, friends, into our bracket. To do that, I'm just going to go ahead and slide it right into where the original was. You can see that it's going to want to slide in between these brackets. Let's go ahead and slide that. Next, we're going to line up all of our holes here. You can start with whichever bolt you'd like. And do this bottom one. Now we're going to move along to the other bolts. We'll just go ahead and start them all in, and then we can snug them up. The nut on the back side there. Okay, so I'm just going to hold that nut with a wrench on the back there. Go ahead and blast this right in. Make sure it's nice and tight. We'll do the same to the other one here. And then our last bolt on the center there. Before we can go ahead and put on our pulley, the next thing that we like to do is go ahead and clean this down. If you have any power steering fluid on it, you want to make sure you get it off so it doesn't get on your belt. Once it's clean, go ahead and slide it right onto the pump. It should want to set right in. We're going to take our nut. If you wanted to, you could use a little bit of thread locker on this. Let's go ahead and blast this on there. All right, now we can go ahead and start putting this up into the vehicle. We're going to go ahead and start with the two upper bolts along here. And then once we have them started, we'll just go ahead and lift this up, put in our third lower bolt there. Once they're all started, we can snug them up. I'm going to do this third lower bolt now. All right, so that one's bottomed out. Let's just make sure it's nice and tight. Now we'll do the same to the top. Now we'll just go ahead and make our way in here. We'll snug these up as well. Now the next thing that we're going to do is continue on to cleaning up the sensor and the gaskets. These gaskets are very important, especially along the areas where they're going to meet up against either the sensor itself or even the line or the power steering pump. Essentially for these, we're just going to go ahead and wipe them down and make sure they're clean and free of any debris on both sides. Do the same to both and clean up the threads on the actual sensor itself. Once you have that clean, let's go ahead and take this rubber cap off of our pump here. And then the next thing we're going to do is grab onto our power steering pressure hose. Now I'm going to take that pressure sensor with the gasket and I'm going to bring it right down through the top of that pressure hose. After that, I'll put the bottom gasket on there and then start this into the power steering pump. Sometimes it can be difficult to get the right angle on this. Now I'm going to wait on tightening this fully. Now let's continue on to our return line. I'm going to go ahead and take off this rubber cap right here. We'll set that aside. Take that return line hose. We're going to slide it right over that fitting. Slide that hose all the way down so it's completely on the fitting, and then we're going to grab the clamp and put it back in the original position that it was in the beginning. Double check it, make sure it's nice and tight. Now I'm going to move along to tightening up this pressure line here. We're just going to take this so it bottoms out, and then just give it a teeny bit more. You don't need to add too much pressure here. We just want to ensure that those gaskets are going to be able to do their job, and they're going to be pressed directly up against the pump, the line, and of course the sensor. Now that we have that nice and tight, let's go ahead and reconnect our sensor. When we push this down, we want to be listening for a click. That's going to signify that it's locked in, and then we're just going to give it a nice light tug just to make sure it's completely secure. There's a little click. I heard it and felt it. Give it a little wiggle. That feels great. Go ahead and cover it up with that protective boot. Next, we're going to continue on to putting on our bracket here. We'll go ahead and slide it right over that stud. Take that mounting nut. We're just going to start this on here, but we're going to leave it loose for now. Next, let's grab the bolt that goes into the bracket, into the pump. We'll leave this one loose as well. After you have all that situated properly, the next thing we're going to do is the belt right along here. Just make sure it's situated along the areas of the grooves on that crank pulley. After that, go ahead and put it right up and over this power steering pump pulley. Slide it into position here. Okay. Now the next thing that we want to do is try to adjust this. And when we adjust it, we want to make sure that we're putting a little bit of pressure on this, but not so much that it's pulling it so taut that it could potentially wipe out any bearings, whether it's on the crank or even the power steering pump itself. If you leave it too loose, it'll squeal. If you make it too tight, you could potentially damage some bearings, like I said. Now what I'm going to do is just go ahead and get along the back side of this pump. I'm going to carefully try to lift it straight up. Now we'll test the belt, make sure it seems as though it's taut enough, and snug it up. Once it feels as though it's adjusted properly, let's go ahead and snug up this nut up here. Now we just need to tighten up that last pivot bolt. That's going to be located up on the top rearward side of that power steering pulley. Let's go ahead and use our 12mm socket. We're going to put it right on there. We'll make this nice and snug as well. Now we're just going to triple check that belt. Perfect. Let's go ahead and get our shield on here. We're going to slide it behind this panel, up along the back side of there, and get it into position. Once it's in position, go ahead and start in both of your mounting bolts. Once they're both started, snug them up. Now let's go ahead and get our wheel on here. We're going to start on all the lug nuts. We'll bottom them out, get the wheel back on the ground, and then we can torque each lug nut to 76 foot-pounds. Let's torque these in a crisscross manner. Torqued. If you have a center cover, go ahead and put that on now. Now the next thing that we're going to want to do is go ahead and fill up this reservoir right here. After that, go ahead and jack up the front end of the vehicle so both front wheels are off the ground, and then we'll continue with our bleeding process. To continue, now we'll go ahead and hop inside the passenger compartment. We're just going to go ahead and turn the key to the on position and start turning that steering wheel all the way to the left side lock position. Pause for a couple seconds, and then turn it all the way to the passenger side lock position. Pause once again, and then we'll continue doing this process several times. Now let's take a pause from in there and come back into the engine compartment. Double check that fluid. You're going to notice that it went down quite a bit. This is super common because we're burping out any air that's in the system and replacing it with fluid. So at this point, I'm just going to continue on by adding some more power steering fluid to this. And yes, this is actually ATF. And now we'll just do that process a little bit more until we see no more air bubbles coming out of this area. Okay, now after we just finished doing that last little bleed out sequence, I triple checked to make sure that my fluid was still pretty much topped off. Now what I want to do is just carefully start up the vehicle, and I'm only going to let it run for a few seconds and then turn it right back off. There we are. Now let's check our fluid. Now once you've started it and you're sure by looking inside here that you don't see any more air bubbles coming from the system, the next thing that I always like to do is just try to cap it off right here. Make sure it's nice and tight, and then we're just going to go ahead and put the vehicle back down on the ground so the wheels are touching. We'll run the vehicle for a little bit and start turning the wheels with the full weight of the vehicle on the ground. We're essentially waiting to make sure we don't hear any whining noise come from the power steering pump. Okay friends, we got the car back together. What's left to do now? Now you're just going to want to go ahead and make sure that you don't have any power steering fluid leaks from the system. After that, go ahead and take it for a road test. Take it for a spin around the block. We're listening for any funny noises such as a whine coming from the power steering system. If you do hear a whine, typically it's because there's still air in the system, in which case you'd just want to go ahead and bleed out that system a little bit more. Aside from that, once you get back home or at least into a safe area, go ahead and pop the hood and triple check that power steering fluid one more time. We want to ensure that it's up to the par where it needs to be, and then just take a peek underneath and ensure that you don't have any leaks. Thanks.